Welcome in, everybody. Episode number 2 of the NLL Weekly Podcast. Chris Schmidbauer, Dan Naraki, thanks so much for joining us here this evening. Week 1 is in the books of the 2024 high school football season. Lots of surprises. Obviously, the big story that we'll talk about tonight is what does the injury of Ryan Montgomery down at Findlay mean for the Trojans football season, and then kind of what it means for the rest of the league throughout the rest of the year. At 7:15 tonight, or at least around there, we're going to speak with Napoleon's head coach, Tyler Swary. They had a incredible win over Defiance on Friday night, 35-34 overtime winners. They were actually down by 3 touchdowns in that football game in the second quarter, ended up coming back to win the River Rock on the road. We're going to talk with him about all of the exciting things that have transpired with his program over the last year. So we're excited to speak with him. Of course, we'll break down what happened in week 1. We'll talk about what's coming up in week number 2 and some of the storylines that get into where things are going in the 2024 season. Dan, you and I got to see a pretty fun one on Friday. We had Whitmer, Dublin, Kaufman. Obviously, we do all the Whitmer football games on Q105, shameless plug. But when you think about what we saw on Friday, you find out about Ryan Montgomery, you lose him for the season. Really, that to me is, despite how well a lot of teams played last Friday, that to me is the one that totally changes the way things will go here for the remainder of the year, because you basically lost the number 1 quarterback in the league, maybe in the state of Ohio. Curious to see how Findlay rebounds, but the big news is, what does it mean in the interim for those other NLL teams?
Yeah, this completely shuffles the entire deck of cards in the division, right? I
Yeah.
mean, Findlay came in as the favorite to repeat as champion, with Whitmer right behind them. And right now, it's harsh to say, but really it is until Findlay proves they can get their feet underneath them. And that may be a couple of weeks until they get into a full conference slate, that this is now going to be Whitmer's division to lose, as far as we're considering. And they have a huge obstacle ahead of them this weekend, and
Absolutely.
aren't thinking at all about the conference or winning a division or anything like that. But I'd say right now that you've got to give the nod to the Panthers, and then everybody else will just kind of fight for second place.
Yeah, we'll see how everything shakes out. Anthony Wayne was a winner. Perrysburg was a winner. Clay, very impressive in week number 1. So a lot of teams, I thought, showed out. Southview absolutely dominated Northview in the first week. I think when I look at the overall first week, last year, it felt like we had a lot of teams from the NLL lose in week number 1. That not necessarily the case this year. Perrysburg, they were going to win against St. Francis regardless last year, but Findlay loses again to Central. That's not a big surprise. Anthony Wayne lost to Darby last year. They come back and win. Southview, Northview. Southview dominated that one last year. Sandusky Clay was one that came down to a final play. Not the case this year. Defiance thumped Napoleon. Again, we'll talk with Tyler Swary about that game in a little bit. But for the most part, we saw the teams that we expected to be in a position to win. They looked pretty good in week 1, and we'll see if that continues. Obviously, as I've said to a couple of people this week, and you and I both know this better than anybody, week 1 is always kind of for the overreaction week. You either you win a game and you're going to be state champion, or you lose game number 1, and God help us if we're not 0-10, because that's where we're headed. So week 1 is always ripe for overreaction, for just kind of people taking a small sample size and conflating it to how everything's going to go. But with the games that we had last week, at the very least, that first step out of the gate at least gives us something where some of these leagues are going to be pretty exciting and might play out similar or even maybe closer than what we saw last year.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think, honestly, we learned more in week 1 from the teams that lost probably than the teams that won. Honest, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
We talked about it last week about where Dublin Kaufman was as a team and how much of a test that is going to be for Whitmer. And we can talk about the struggles the Shamrocks had.
Yeah.
So that was, again, that was a probably a more telling for them than Whitmer. Probably the same thing for Findlay as they had to deal with that injury. The same thing for Northview. We were coming in questioning where they were. Was this a team ready to take the next step forward? This doesn't mean they're not necessarily ready to take the next step forward. And Southview could be better than we thought, but they're still in those opening stages, just like Springfield, who got dominated by Maumee.
Yeah.
And I remember to call them Maumee this time. And the same thing, I think we found out a little bit about where Clay was and their ability to stand, and Mason Heights will be able to step up and take care of Sandusky. So there's always, like you said, there's that knee-jerk reaction to week one, and that happens at every level of football.
Yes.
It's gonna be we're about to have the same thing happen in the college ranks, and in 2 weeks we're gonna have the same thing happen in the pros. So it's really tough, but you've got to kind of rein these expectations in and give these teams a week or two, especially those that came out of week one dealing with new adversity, to really figure out where they're at. And like Dublin Coffin, you said, was the perfect example of that, where the week before they were still shuffling the lineup, trying to figure out which combination of players is going to work best. Maybe they found it last Friday night. Maybe they have to go a month into their season before they really gel.
Well, let's talk about that game for a minute. Whitmer's offense looked really good. We were impressed by what we saw. The funny thing is, when you take those stats from week one and you kind of parse them down, they are the most misleading bunch of stats, I think, that you could possibly put in front of somebody. If I told you that Dublin Kaufman put up 400 yards of total offense and Whitmer only put up, I think, like high twos, low threes. If I told you that Dublin Kaufman held the ball for almost twice as long as Whitmer did last week, if I told you that their quarterback ran for over 180 yards, you would assume that if I gave you the final score of 42-14, you would have assumed that Kaufman had the 42 and Whitmer had the 14. Obviously not the case. The big things that stood out to me, one was how fast the offense for Whitmer was able to score. There were a lot of 1, 2, less than 10 play drives. And I think of all of the drives that they scored on, only that first one was more than 10 plays. And I think that was only, if memory serves, 12 or 11 plays total. Everything else was less than 10 plays. That was incredible if you think about how efficient that Whitmer team was. The other part of it was how little Whitmer ran the football, not because they didn't want to, because they literally weren't on the field long enough. You figure that second offensive series was a 1-play, 81-yard touchdown drive to Joey Morales. That's obviously going to limit the amount of time that you're going to be able to run the football. So Whitmer didn't exactly control the clock, but it wasn't because they didn't want to. It was because they didn't have to. So going into this week, we're going to find out, and again, we'll preview that game towards the end of the show, but this is a week where we're going to know a little bit more about that Whitmer offense, not because they don't have the propensity to be good. It's just they were so good last week that we didn't really get a chance to really see a sustained drive very often. Again, that first drive is the only one we saw. After that, they were very quick succession drives, short field drives, big play drives that set up touchdowns. Just didn't really have a whole lot of a sustained where Whitmer had to grind out a 12 to 15 play drive and eat 4 minutes or 5 minutes of the clock. You had, again, essentially a couple or a handful of drives that really were maybe even more than 5 plays. It was pretty incredible just how efficient that offense was.
Well, there were two other things that stuck out as well that were way in their advantage. Is that the defense was stepping up and allowing them to win the field possession game. Special teams also played really well, both on kickoff and it was mostly kickoff and punt coverage as well. So that is a huge thing, and every coach will tell you that if you do not try to win all 3 phases of the game, you're going to leave a gaping hole for your opponent to take advantage of. And it is something that you and Justin Keller had talked about during the broadcast last week about how well this team was able to execute screen passes to where that was not a part, really not really a part of the offense that was strong a year ago. And like you mentioned, the Joey Morales touchdown was an inside screen and he just took off.
Yeah.
And you know, when you have a back that has that kind of speed, just the make one guy miss and then everyone has to chase him. That is a powerful card to be able to pull out in the offense. Like you said, the main difference this coming week is going to be, are they going to be able to continue to move quickly, or are they going to be bogged down by a much bigger central defense?
Sure. The other guy that you already mentioned, Mason Heinchel, really good against Sandusky last week. They win 38-21 over the Blue Streaks. Heinchel threw for 293, 4 touchdowns, also ran for 119. Really nice performance. You could see why Pitt is excited about Mason Heinchel for next year. Thought he really stood out. Will Mazies was the other guy that played very well for Southview in that win over Northview last week. Mazies basically threw for over 200, had a couple touchdown passes as well. He ran the ball extremely well. Grant Kinney, who's the other quarterback that's beyond Ryan Montgomery, who unfortunately didn't play very much, but Grant Kinney at Anthony Wayne is the other quarterback that is going to play collegiately. Not so great throwing the ball, did most of the damage with his legs, which you would expect. So when you look at the quarterbacks in general, all of the guys that we talked about last week, when we ranked them, it was kind of Ryan Montgomery. We said Mason Heinchel was probably the next in line. Then maybe Brady Ford, Grant Kinney, and Will Mazie you kind of throw as a toss-up in there. But the quarterbacks that we expected to play well, outside of Ryan Montgomery for obvious reasons, all played really well and had a huge hand in their team's victories last week. So, I mean, you get that opportunity, and you have those guys show out. It might be the best conference that I've ever seen with quarterbacks and the depth at the position throughout the league.
And that's something I was just thinking because, I mean, granted, it's been a long time since I have been in the conference, but This hasn't been a conference known for quarterback play. And right now it might be one of the strongest in the area. If you kind of look at top to bottom, there's a lot of talent across the board, which is great to see. And you know, the league just kind of stepping up by having all of this talent coming together at once and maturing.
Other surprising score to me was the Perrysburg-St. Francis game. Not that Perrysburg won, how close it was. Kudos to Josh Linke and the Knights for giving Perrysburg a test last Friday. But you look at how Perrysburg had to score last week. It was all Joe Cini who took over for Nick Oros, and he was somebody that was their tremendous tailback. Well, Joe Cini steps in. He scores all 4 touchdowns for the Perrysburg Yellow Jackets. You wonder moving forward, can they continue to rely on that running game? Because we saw this last year at times with the Panthers that when you get one-dimensional, teams can start to key in on something. So eventually Perrysburg's going to have to throw the football to win. We'll see how that goes down, but I'm curious to see how legit St. Francis is, obviously, not that they're a league team, but then also can that Perrysburg offense develop something different beyond just literally feeding the tailback the football all the time.
Yeah, and that's one of the, and you hope to think that it's not a case of Perrysburg was necessarily playing to the level of their opponents if St. Francis is still in that rebuild mode. But so hopefully that was a true showing of the talent on both sides. And when it'll be interesting to see that when the Yellow Jackets come up against a more stout defense and are forced to throw the ball and are forced to be a little more creative with their offense, like you said, will they be able to make that change?
Well, the other big storyline from last week was our guest who is waiting. But before we do that, want to say thank you to Car Stereo One. Car Stereo One, whatever you need from them, whether it's remote starters, window tint, speakers, subwoofers, they can even take care of your bike or your boat, custom interiors, vehicle wraps, wheels, all that you could need at Car Stereo One. Parker Lopez, who is a Whitmer graduate. We love Parker. We love what he brings to the table. He's such a big supporter of ours. But make sure you check him out. 3120 Central Avenue, right there at the Secor and Central intersection. And then, of course, if you want to make an appointment, book something with them, 419-474-5553. You can check them out online, carstereo1.com. So, again, make sure you give our friends over at Car Stereo One a visit. Again, they're Toledo's best custom car stereo and outfitter in Northwest Ohio. So at this time, let's go ahead and bring our first guest in of the night, and that is Tyler Swary, whose team was definitely making things exciting for us last week, Coach, because you guys 35-34 overtime winners in that rivalry game over Defiance. Rewind us to last week. You guys are down 3 touchdowns in that second quarter, somehow figure out a way to win. And when we talked to you last year, your team didn't get off to the best start of the year. You said, guys just kept believing. Guys just kept believing. That game is almost like a microcosm of how your season went last year. Maybe not the best start, but the way it finished was spectacular for you guys.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back into last year, just the way that we finished and the fight that we had in a couple of those games last year. Kind of reminded me of the Clay game last year where it went into a couple overtimes, and our guys just didn't stop. We were down, got down early, kept chipping away, and got ourselves back the lead, and then obviously gave it up again. So you give the kids a lot of credit, and the coaching staff for just keep plugging away.
I look at the start, and I know that when we talked last year, that was something that everybody focused on, and understanding of to start out 0-4 and then to finish on the note that you guys finished is fantastic. But is there a little bit more of a bounce in the step of the guys this week, getting that first win under your belt? Because and we'll talk about it in a second, but the road doesn't get any easier this week. But to be able to get that first game and get that first win, I'm sure it wasn't something that you guys stressed necessarily, but everybody likes to win week 1. Nobody wants to lose.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's a heck of a lot better being 1-0 than 0-1. That's coming from experience. So, it's obviously, it's awesome. And it was a really fun night, and really, really excited for our kids and our community. But I told them that night, you have 24 hours to feel good about it. And then, we watched film on Saturday, and we got done, and I said, it's over. Right. So, and I think playing a really good Liberty Center team kind of makes you snap out of it. I mean, our guys know that. It's one thing if you're going to go play somebody that's not, you think you're going to run them over. That's not the case. And our kids know what we're going up against. Our coaches know. So there was no feel good messing around at practice this week. It was, let's go. If we're not there mentally and physically, it's going to get ugly. So I think that, I don't want to say it, I like playing somebody that tough
sure
after that, but it's good for us to get us going.
When we talked to you last year, I know that you were on the verge, or had just had your wife had just had a new child when we talked to you last year. I imagine that baby is getting ready to be 1. I look at where you were at this time when we talked to you, granted, not quite a year ago, little under a year, but you rewind to last year and you're going into the biggest game of the season, and kind of the same thing with that game at Southview, like we just talked about, where you guys, maybe not the best start, but just kept in it all the way and really are a possession away from pulling off an upset. When you have that ending, and I know we just talked about game 1, but when you have that ending, was it easy coming back into this year? Not that kids didn't buy into what you were doing last year, but you're able to say, like, listen, we literally just proved what happens when you stick with it, trusting the process, which, as you know, as a coach, it's so hard to do. Mm-hmm. How easy was it? And then you get the playoff one on top of it. Stuff's popping back in my head, but you get the playoff one on top of it. How much of an easier lift was it coming into this season, having the kids motivated to come back and say, look how close we were? Couple different games we played differently. Look what the end result could have been versus what it ended up being.
Yeah. It's one of those, when you have a bad season, your off season is all built around,
right.
We don't want to have that bad season again. We want to be better. When you finish the way we did, and we were able to, like you said, win a playoff game for the first time since 2012, that is just as much motivation of, we want to do that again and then some. So, we're really lucky to have a really strong senior class. Trey Rubenstein, Owen Espinoza, those guys lived in the weight room this off season. And when you have guys like that are multi-sport athletes that are also lifting, and they're they're making it to our team lifts in the morning. It just pushes everybody else. And it's, we always talk about, it's not, we don't want to make it rules. It's just the standard, it's, I'm not going to force you to be here, but the standard is you're here, so, when you have guys like that buy in, and it makes my job a lot easier. And then again, it brings everybody else up, and the results show on the field.
You mentioned Trey, maybe in my opinion, a guy that gets forgotten about maybe too often in the area, because obviously you guys are about 45 minutes west of here, but I think a lot of people who haven't seen Trey play before might have been shocked that a place like Kent State would have wanted Trey, just because people think of Napoleon football, and it just doesn't maybe get the same kind of love. But Trey's one of those kids, I think, that's the perfect example of, as you said, he has the right attitude. He's a tough-nosed player. I mean, a guy who runs the football, can go out, and you have him on the defensive side a lot as well. Just really adds a lot. But what does he mean in that locker room? You mentioned just the example he set in the weight room, but he's also a guy that plays a lot of different sports at Napoleon, just as I think a leader from top to bottom. How has he led this group coming into this year?
Yeah, and he's one of those guys, he keeps everybody in check. If for example, tonight at practice, if somebody's, messing around, or we're not getting things done the right way, it's usually him getting on people. And there's a fine line between, being a jerk and being a leader. He toes that line sometimes, but most of the time it's, and kids are going to listen to him. If Trey's telling you something, you better listen, because he's put his time in. He's, he's earned that. So, that's one of those things. And again, he was voted captain too. So, those guys, they're my extension in the locker room. They let me know if there's issues. I go to them if I need them to talk to people too. And so, they definitely listen to him.
Maybe that's my problem. I'm more of a jerk than maybe a leader. Maybe that's why I don't have people liking me as much. Owen's another guy that you mentioned already. Owen Espinoza, kind of another guy that gets lost in the shuffle because there are so many good quarterbacks in the league and put up maybe more eye-popping numbers. The offense that you guys run is not necessarily a pass-first offense, but to run something like a wing T type of offense where you've got to make the right read, you've got to make the right pull, the amount of decision-making that goes on at the line of scrimmage, maybe Owen's not throwing the ball as much, but the decision-making is just as important on being able to read what a backer's doing, being able to read what the end's doing, who's maybe shading over the middle, recognizing blitzes. He, I think, is another big reason offensively, because you have to have a guy that knows that system well. I'm sure having coached it, it is not easy, I'm sure, to figure out and learn the nuances. And I always compare it to a little bit like Navy, where Navy is always really good when they've got an experienced guy at quarterback, because he knows that offense like the back of his hand. Not that Owen hasn't prior to this, but I bet this year he probably feels like he's as comfortable as he's ever been in this offense.
Yeah, he definitely. He came in, I think it was week 5 as a sophomore. Our starting quarterback, Blake Wolf, got hurt and or had to have surgery on his hand. And he came in and obviously, he had some growing pains, that year. His junior year, he started off, with some tough games.
Sure.
But he's gotten more comfortable. This offseason, he spent a ton of time in the weight room. He put some muscle on. He worked on his speed. We had weekly morning speed sessions every week, and he was at almost all of those. And you can tell just when you watch him. I've watched our game film, a couple times, just how comfortable he is in the pocket, and he's staring downfield. He's gotten a lot better at kind of understanding coverages and what teams are giving him. And I tell you what, when you have a quarterback like that, we're forced to change our offense a little bit.
Sure.
We threw the ball 40 times on Friday. I don't know if that's ever happened at Napoleon. So when you have a quarterback like that, and you have some guys that you can get the ball to, like a Trey, and we have Cole Sarrigan was a big target for him on Friday. you as a coach have to adapt. If I'm just going to sit there and say, we run the ball, that's it, shame on me, So
sure.
We want to make sure that we are getting the ball in our athletes' hands and letting them make decisions. And, Owen, it's an easy decision to let him do that.
Two guys that were really big in that game last week. Hayden Gherkin made that big play in the back of the end zone, pushing the receiver out on the 2-point. And then George Eggers was just terrific for you guys last week. I know, again, Trey probably is the back everybody's going to key on, but to have more than one in that offense, you have to have one. To have guys step up, which is ultimately what any coach wants to have guys be able to evolve and grow. What did it mean? What does it mean for this program? And I'm sure there'll be other guys. I know Hayden's been there for a little bit, but you'll have other guys who will continue to play in games. It can't always just be Trey. It can't always just be Owen. Other guys have to step up, and that's what happened last Friday.
Yeah. Like you said, George, he not only is a monster when he gets the ball in the running game, but he had a couple receiving touchdowns. He's a threat with that, and that I think that's going to help us even more in terms of people want to blitz us and things like that. If we can use him to flare him out and kind of keep teams honest, that's going to be huge. Like I said, Cole Sarrigan had a big game. We at one point we were down 2 in the fourth as we were driving to go ahead, and Trey was out, so we didn't have Trey. We didn't have. We were down to like our third wing.
Okay.
We had like 4 guys in there that usually aren't in there. If we're starting the game, they're not going to be in there. And we marched the ball down to I think we got down to the 20 before Trey was able to come back in. And so the amount of guys that stepped up and came in and made some type of play. We had a couple guys come in on defense too that there was no position for. I mean, we were down, we couldn't stop them in the first half. So we basically drew up a defense in the locker room. And when we came back out, there was no backups to our defense on the whiteboard. So we're just throwing guys in there and saying, hey, just go stand over there and make it. And guys were able to do it, So to have kids step up and just understand their role of, I'm only going to be in here for 2 plays, but I'm going to make them really good, 2 plays. So that was really, really refreshing.
You took over the program from Tori Strock, who I know when we've talked in the past, you've said has been a great mentor and friend to you. And when you and I talked, because I think I actually covered the game that Owen started for the first time. If memory serves, that was at Springfield, wasn't it?
It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I did that game for BCSN. When we even talked then, it's about how do you kind of make this your program? I know it's year 3. Has it been like a gradual process of feeling like because Tori had been there for so long, or did even last year feel like this is mine now? I know that first year is always you don't know what you don't know, and you walk into a lot of didn't think I'd be dealing with this situation as a head coach. But year 2, year 3, was there a big jump between year 2 or year 3, or is it still evolving even into year 3?
I think it's still evolving, but I think there definitely was a big jump after that first year. Just having an understanding of what to expect. There's always going to be things that, have no, I still, Coach Strock's in the building still. I text him probably weekly, just random things. If I think of something, hey, what did you do in this situation? Or what would you do for this? And he's been awesome. He helps me out as much as he can. But yeah, no, I think at this point, plus, it was almost a whole new staff too. So It wasn't just, Tori, it was a whole new staff. And I think it definitely, I would say mid last year, when things kind of started clicking, I think the staff started clicking as well. And it's just evolved, into this year. And we've added more people to the staff that have meshed really well. And I think at this point, it feels different, and nothing against what it was before. It's just, it's different, and it feels that way at this point.
You're kind of being able to finally put your stamps on it a little bit where, and I'm sure that there's always that temptation to not change anything because it worked in the past. And it's probably not easy for a young head coach to trust your gut, I'd imagine. Yeah, no.
And there's still things that we do that we did 10 years ago, so, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, there's definitely things that I still do that Coach Strock did that I got from him. And But there are obviously things that I added, and our coaching staff that, new guys that, were from somewhere else, that saw it from somewhere else. We've added things from that, and just kind of meshed.
Adversity, we've talked about, was kind of a lot of the theme in 2023 and fighting through that. For people who don't know what you did or how you did it, how did you keep that team invested last year? Because a lot of teams go through those stretches and it's really easy to quit. It's really hard to keep guys invested. Is it something that you feel like is just kind of in the community and bred in the program? Is it something that you did? Is it all of the above? How did you keep everybody invested and not giving up when things didn't look the best last year?
Well, I think there's a multitude of things. I mean, obviously, I think it's in our kids' DNA. I think Napoleon has tough people. Henry County's tough people. So that helps. But we, after we got our butts kicked week 2 by Liberty Center, it was kind of we sat down and had a heart-to-heart, and basically said the way that we're doing things right now is not working, and I think we were so focused on the outcome of all these games and beating Defiance, beating Liberty Center. And we finally said, listen, you got to stop worrying about that. We have to worry about being really good in practice. We got to focus on getting everybody here on time, to school. If you can do those little things, then the process, you do all the little things in the process, you're going to get the outcomes that you want. And, so that started week 3. We had a really good week of practice that week of Northview. We lost to Northview. We did not. We started off. We had a kickoff return for a touchdown, and then our first offensive possession was a pick 6. So, but we played much better. Other than those 2 things, we played much better in that game. We had some fight. All the above, and it was one of those things where it's like, listen. Again, we don't care about I don't care about winning and losing at this point. We just need to get better. And we had Anthony Wayne week 4, and again, that was the mindset.
Yeah.
And we didn't beat Anthony Wayne, but we played with him. And we had a chance. We were up 7-0 at the towards the end of the third quarter, and then they ended up just they outmanned us basically. And at that point, I think it kind of switched in their heads. Okay, we're fine. And at that point. You're 0-4. We're not thinking about playoffs. We're not thinking about anything. It's just let's just keep improving. And we'll that's it. That's all we care about. And we did. And then we beat Springfield. We get on a roll there, and that's the mindset though. We tried to that's what we kept with every week that we won. We don't care. We're still 0-4 at this point. We just want to get better every day, and it just worked. The kids bought into that mindset, and obviously then into this season, that's still our mindset. We read the book Pound the Stone.
Okay.
That's kind of our motto this year, and again, that's process over outcome. It's the same. It's that motto of hitting that same spot over and over and over again, and eventually that rock's going to break, and but you don't know when it's going to be. You just got to keep doing what you're doing, and good things are going to happen. And that's been the mindset since week 2 last year. So we're going to keep doing that.
How nice was it too to have that first year of the NLL, where in years past, if you had lost the first couple of conference games, you're immediately out of a chase. To have a chance to win a division title last year, to take it down to the final week. I've talked with a lot of people around here. Obviously, in calling Whitmer games, it was nice because the last 3 or 4 weeks, that's where everything happens at for league titles. How nice was it too to have that carrot to dangle out in front of the kids and say, despite how bad this has been or how unsuccessful we've been, you guys still have a chance to win a league championship. And again, you almost pulled that off. You're within a possession of doing it. I'm sure that was an easy or a nice thing to have in your back pocket to say that's still out in front of us.
Yeah. And after we won a couple, our projections and stuff for playoffs, it was like, hey, we started off 0-4. We now have an opportunity, like you said, to win an NLL title. We also had an opportunity if we would have beat Southview, we probably would have hosted a playoff game.
Yeah.
So we get into week 10. It's like all that before, we've got everything in front of us still. There was nothing at that point, after, you obviously lose the River Rock. So, that was out of the picture, but everything else that we want to do is sitting there right in front of us. So, that definitely kept kids in the hunt and their mindset of, hey, we've got stuff to play for here other than just pride.
You mentioned Liberty Center. That's the game this Friday. Everybody knows how good the Tigers were a year ago. They were really good last week against Tenora. How do you take what happened last week, carry that momentum into this week as best you can, but then also make sure that guys are ready for war? Like you said, it's a really good football team. They were undefeated for much of the year last year. How do you carry that into this week?
Yeah, and I mean, I think they're just as good from watching film. And that's the thing with them being in Henry County is our kids know them. They know who they are. We know what they want to do, how they're going to do it. It's just, can you stop them and can you compete with them? And I think winning that game this past week just gives our guys a little confidence of, hey, Defiance is pretty good. I know, they didn't have the quarterback, but they didn't have him for the last couple of weeks either for their scrimmages. And I thought they played pretty well in their scrimmages. So that's a good football team that we beat. And that should give our guys a little confidence of, hey, if we can beat Defiance, I think we can compete if we play well. That's going to be the thing. Liberty Center is not going to beat themselves. So you have to go there and you got to play mistake-free football. And you have to do everything right to just compete with them. So that's our goal. We want to go over there and give them a 4-quarter fight, and whatever happens.
Before I let you go, the one thing that I always admire, and I remember when Napoleon joined the Northern Lakes League, and people couldn't believe that the NLL would want to get into a league with Perrysburg and the Sylvania schools and all these big programs, Anthony Wayne, and you guys have more than held your own in all sports, to be honest. But you look at this idea that I think when you tell people that you have teams from Division I all the way down to Division IV in the league, people kind of, that Division IV team must, get their rear ends handed to them regularly. And it's the exact opposite. Why or what about this program, this community has allowed you guys to be successful in a league where conventional wisdom says you really shouldn't be? Is it toughness of the kids? Is it just this idea that we're just as good? I mean, your numbers are fantastic for a smaller school. I'm sure there are a lot of coaches that are in the enrollment size that you are that would love to have almost 60 kids out playing varsity football. What is it about this program and this community that allows you guys to continue to be successful in a league where, like I said, people would think you wouldn't be?
Well, I think part of it is it's just been ingrained in their brain in this community, because Napoleon's been in the small school and all the conferences they've been in, GLL, GBC, so they've always been small. It's always been we're the small guy, and I think that just kind of over time just got in our brains that we're gonna compete with anybody. We don't care how big you are, and generation after generation, it just breeds through that, and that's it's just in the kids' DNA that we don't care if we're going to go play a Division II school. We're going to go give them all we got.
Are there any children that are expected after this interview, or are we good this year?
I hope not. No, we might be in trouble. No. So she'll turn 1 in October.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. Again, I remember texting with you about this last year, and you were saying, I don't know that I'm going to be available on Wednesday, because that was a neat thing. And then to also have that happen the week of Southview and have to turn around and go coach a game on Friday, I'm sure was an interesting week in the Swary household. Yeah. Tyler, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Best of luck the rest of the year. Honestly, you're one of my favorite people. We wanted to have you on because, again, your program is one of those, again, that embodies toughness. And I think that's really what you carry. The times I've talked to you, that's what the kids do. And so best of luck to you. And we hope that at some point when we cross paths again, that we're talking about a Cardinal Division championship for you.
It'd be awesome. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you.
That was Tyler Swary, the head football coach at the Napoleon High School. The Wildcats, again, winners over the Defiance for the River Rock rivalry, 35-34 in overtime. Thank you to him for joining us. Let's bring Dan back in now. And again, always good to talk with those coaches. And I don't know, was Napoleon in the league when you were in high school still, or was that after you?
I know that's much after. That's much after. That was, in fact, one of those when we, had kind of looked at the new NLL and going, you guys are traveling all the way out to Napoleon, really?
Yeah.
Wow. All right. It's an interesting move to not just, as you said, expand throughout the divisions, but expand geographically. And I think that's sort of kind of been the trend for a lot of these conferences, is to kind of not be as hemmed in by the geography as they used to be.
Well, but again, to be a D4 school, and I cannot state how crazy it is, because it's not like this just started happening, like they just started competing. They've competed since day one in the league, and it's really been incredible. Again, you're watching or listening to, depending on how you're doing it, the NLL Weekly Podcast, again, right here on YouTube. You can catch us every week. We live stream around 7 o'clock on Wednesdays, and then, of course, you can watch it all week on YouTube. Also, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts, it'll be up there on Thursdays. So make sure, again, you check us out, give us a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We had a few subscribers after last week. We appreciate folks doing that as well. So make sure, again, you check us out. We're going to have all the way into winter sports, spring sports. It's not going to end like we did last year after football season. We're going to try and have some of the other fall sports athletes on here as well as time goes on, as time allows. But definitely appreciate you spending some time with us on the NLL Weekly Podcast. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. Ryan Montgomery announces on Twitter this week that he tore his ACL and he is done for the year. And again, as Dan has up there, expected to be able to play at Georgia, or George, as Dan has it. But the Bulldogs expect him to make a full recovery. The problem is much like the situation with Finley a year ago, and Ryan Montgomery being the focal point or where that offense runs through. You now all of a sudden have a team that is going to have to figure out how to get a sophomore and Riley Korkos ready to play. And to his credit, I thought in a really tough situation, handled himself okay against Central. When we were at the game on Friday, you were giving us score updates down from the sideline. And at one point, I think it was like 21-0 or something like that. And then all of a sudden it was 34-21. And we kind of went, oh, because to that, we'd already known at that point that Ryan had been knocked out of the game. And to still know that Finley was able to move the football with a kid who probably didn't take a lot of 1 reps over the summer or any of that stuff. Not saying that they weren't prepared for it, because obviously you're always hoping that you don't have the worst case scenario, but you got to prepare for it. But the fact that they were still able to move the football, I think is at least gives you a glimmer of hope if you're Finley. But man, at some point you're going to expect that a guy in his first year is going to struggle. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. There's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be hiccups along the way. But it does change the dynamics. And I was talking about this with Mason, who we had, Mason Lowry from BCSN, that we had on the podcast last week. The game that intrigues me the most now moving into week 3 is Southview Finley. And that's a game that maybe a couple weeks ago, I mean, Finley dominated Southview last year. A couple weeks ago, I would have said probably going to be a similar outcome to what we saw a year ago. Southview's better. I don't want to make it sound like they couldn't give him a game. They certainly gave Whitmer a game a year ago. But when you look at this game now, it feels a lot more wide open heading into week 3. Now, Finley actually goes down to Lyman. We'll talk about that game in a little bit. But Mason was also sharing with me, he spoke with Steve Hardy, who's the head football coach at Southview. They actually scrimmaged Lima, and he had nothing but praise to sing about how good Lima was in their scrimmage. So lest anyone think that this week is just going to be some easy, just go ahead and check the box, they're going to win. Not going to be the case. But getting back to my original point, that injury changes things from top to bottom, not just in the Buckeye division, but I think in the Cardinal division as well, because now some of those teams that might have been on the fringe of being able to compete changes a lot of stuff. And obviously Riley Korkos is going to get better as the year goes on, but so are the other teams.
Well, and you mentioned that it's a pretty good play to start, having to come in relief right there in the first quarter and still turn around.
No kidding.
Completing 13 of 19 for 180 yards and a score, and a long score early in the first against one of the best teams in the state.
Yeah.
So against some of the toughest competition they're going to see all year. So if that's the floor that he's setting, I think Finley's in good shape going forward. But like you said, the ideal there for both divisions is now things don't seem to be anymore like a 2-team race, which also means, and I know it's an insane thing to say this as we're looking at going into week 2, but that also puts a lot more computer points on the table than there probably would have been otherwise. And so teams, like you said, like Napoleon, they have a better shot at earning their way into one of those playoff spots.
And getting that home game that Tyler was talking about too, where to get that home game and not have to travel, I mean, what an advantage that would be for that program. Because if you go to Cat Stadium in Napoleon, it's one of the better high school football facilities in Northwest Ohio. It's a great home field advantage. So when you have the opportunities, you said, to steal more points than what you maybe originally thought you were going to have, boy, what an opportunity that all of those teams in the Cardinal division are going to possibly have a chance at, not just from playing Findlay. I don't remember who everybody from the Cardinal that Findlay plays, but the other side of that would be it's the secondary points that you pick up when you beat, let's say Southview does beat Findlay in week 3, and you do get some points from that moving forward. Well, now all of a sudden, if Napoleon's able to beat Southview, they get a bunch of points because Southview beat Findlay. I mean, it really kind of snowballs into a computer points bonanza, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. So I'm really interested to see what that all looks like. But it also means that the title for best quarterback in the league is up for grabs. And Mason Heinchel, we knew, was in that conversation. Will Mazies was in the conversation. Brady Ford in the conversation. All 3 of those guys looked really good last week. Brady Ford threw for 2 touchdowns and over 220 yards. Will Mazies threw for a couple of scores and over 200 yards. Mason Heinchel, we already mentioned, 293 passing, 4 touchdowns, also ran for 119. I look at who all of a sudden can be first-team quarterback in this league. And not that anybody's playing for that distinction, but if you had to guess prior to last week what your preseason all NLL teams were going to be, Ryan Montgomery was going to be on that list. And I know that the Cardinal picks separately, but man, all of a sudden that league mantle of best quarterback is a little more wide open than it was going into last week as well.
And again, like we mentioned a little earlier, something that is kind of impressive to say from a conference standpoint, that the talent is such that you had coming in, we had a clear number 1, and then a 2A and a 2B and a 2C and a 2D. And now that's a 1A, 1B, 1C, 2C, that, any one of those kids could challenge for that. Like you said, I'm sure that's not necessarily the goal that goes on the board at the beginning of the season.
No,
but it's not a bad thing to be able to take as you go forward in your playing career.
Perrysburg had to grind one out. We mentioned against St. Francis, kind of pick up where they left off a little bit with running the football. I'm curious, again, like I said earlier in the podcast, that does that Perrysburg offense develop another dimension? Can they get to the point where they're better throwing the football? I don't know that they didn't throw it a lot, but I was stunned that game was that close. And that's not a knock on Perrysburg, and it's not a denigration on St. Francis. It's just one of those, I don't think anybody saw St. Francis hanging with Perrysburg for 4 quarters. The one game that St. Francis has coming into this week is they play Scott on Friday, and that was a game that Scott upset St. Francis at the Glass Bowl last year. I don't foresee that being the case this year, just after the way St. Francis played the other night. But getting back to teams in the Northern Lakes League, Joe Cini, as I said, 4 touchdowns, had them all for Perrysburg. We'll see if they kind of develop a little bit more of a balanced attack offensively. We mentioned Southview dominating Northview. We talked about Will Mazies. The other guy that we need to talk about, Mo MacArthur, who is the new running back, 113 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns, taken over for Isaac Sexton. Nice debut for him at the running back spot. Really impressed with Mo MacArthur and what he did for Southview. If they have a balanced attack, they're going to be really tough to beat as well.
And I think we said a lot about Southview last year, that going, this team is right there on the cusp of taking that next step and going back to really the dominant team they've been for quite a while, going back to the early 2000s. So it's good. I guess it's nice to see that they are on the right track there, and
Sure.
they're going to be able to do it on the ground this year. Something that the rest of the league is going to have to watch out for.
Well, enough about week 1. We'll get to week 2. Before we do that, want to say thank you to Victory Auto Mall. Victory Auto Mall, your trusted used car dealer in Toledo, Ohio. Whether you're shopping for your first car or your 10th truck, their staff provides outstanding service and a no-pressure environment. Their only goal, to find you a great vehicle that matches your lifestyle and service you well for years to come. Victory Auto Mall has an established exemplary reputation in the community, and they are a buy here, pay here dealership. If you want to check them out, you can visit them 1632 West Lasky Road in Toledo, and they're right next to the Tuffy there at Lasky and Jackman. And then, of course, you can call them 419-345-3603 or online, WeFinanceCarsToday.com. And thank you to Victory Auto Mall for their continued support of the NL Weekly podcast. On to the games in week number 2. And the one that stands out immediately, we'll get to at the end. But I'll let you take over.
All right, this is where I get to play host and you get to play pundit. So
yeah,
here we go. And we also already mentioned a bunch about Mason Heinchel and how the Clay Eagles will host Northview. Will Heinchel be able to continue the show that he put on last week? And will Northview have any chance at slowing him down?
Easy answer, yes. And Northview does not have much of a chance to slow him down. I was really impressed with the stat line from last week, just because when we saw Mason last year, I think the ability to be efficient as efficient as he was maybe the best thing that John Gallius and the Clay staff could have seen out of him last week. To be able to be balanced running and passing, to have the 4 touchdowns, and really make a game that was super interesting a year ago not really interesting at all. That's a good first step for this Clay team. And if you remember last week, I had said, I wondered, could this Clay team continue to carry their play? They always get off to good starts. Can they continue to carry that play into weeks 4, weeks 5, week 6, week 7? If Mason Heinchel plays like he did last week against Sandusky in every game this season, Clay's going to win a lot of football games. You hate to put it all on his shoulders, because I know that's a talented team around him, some really good receivers. But that Clay team is going to have some games where they're going to need Mason Heinchel to carry them to victory. It won't be next Friday or this Friday, but I look at that game and I really am curious to see what Mason Heinchel does as an encore.
The Riley Corcos era getting his first start this week as Findlay welcomes in the preseason City League favorites, Lima Senior. Yes, that's still weird to say. So considering this will be a bit of a little bit more of an equal game for them in Findlay, how do you think that they'll be able to break Corcus in, and will he be able just to have another performance like he did last week?
Yeah, I wonder what this Findlay staff, does to try and ease him into things. Obviously, he got thrown into the fire last week, but this will be a game plan that's tailored to what Riley Corcos does well. I don't know enough about the young man. I think Neil Schuler, our friend over at Black Swamp Football, said it best to go from Mr. Anonymity, who no one could have named who Ryan Montgomery's backup was prior to last week, to go from that to here's the keys to the kingdom. Man, that's a huge jump in the matter of a few hours. How does Findlay attack? You might have an advantage if you're Findlay, because there isn't a lot of film on what Riley does well and what they want to do with Riley. But that Lima senior team, as I said just a few minutes ago, is much better. The reviews from them were much better during the preseason from the teams that had scrimmaged them. They beat Piqua. That's not an easy place to win. And that Lima senior team to get the win against Piqua and do it by a couple scores, that's a good victory. Bill Lawrence has Lima senior playing really well. That one is almost one of those pick 'em, just because I don't know enough about Findlay at this point. And until we see what Riley can do from kickoff to finish of a game, that's where I'm going to be most interested. I don't even know that I could really say who I thought the favorite was, just because I don't know enough about this Findlay team yet. And I bet Stephen Adams is probably saying the same thing. I don't know a lot about what we are right now after last week. They're going to kind of be reinventing themselves on the fly. And sometimes teams are really good at that. And Stefan's a great coach. His staff is fantastic. They should be able to do that. The question is, how fast does Riley catch on to things? And that's the number one question I have right now.
In another City League NLL matchup, Waite hits the road to take on Southview. And I don't think anyone would be surprised to say the outcome is likely not going to be disputed. The question really is what the Cougars need to do to take out of that game with Findlay on deck in week 3.
Two things. One is stay healthy. These games always scare me. If I were a head coach, it would always scare me, because it's a game that you're going to probably roll pretty big in. And no disrespect to Waite, but the talent gap is pretty apparent. The biggest thing, though, is get off to a good start. And then, like I said, stay healthy. Those are the two that if I'm putting my emphasis on as we're walking out of the locker room, don't do anything stupid. And let's just get off to a good start and put this away early. It's a great game and a great opportunity for some of those guys who don't often get to play on Friday nights. They're going to get their shot on Friday against Waite. You want to be able to say, we put those guys in middle of the second quarter, or they played the entire second half. That's what you want if you're Steve Hardy and that staff. The other part of this is the dedication of Jim Mazey's field. They put the new turf in over at Mel Nussbaum Stadium. Jim Mazey's the longtime head coach, still an assistant under Steve Hardy. They will dedicate the field in his honor on Friday. So I imagine that Southview's going to come out pretty fired up again, but just kind of stay focused. Don't do anything that doesn't need to be done. Don't be reckless. Just get out of there, put in a workmanlike effort, and don't let anybody get hurt, basically, because as you said, that Findlay game looms. And if they're able to go to Findlay next week and get a win down in Hancock County, that turns this entire league on its ear a little bit, because all of a sudden you really have to take, not that people don't take Southview seriously now, but you really have to take Southview seriously after that.
Another team asking, what exactly do we have on offenses? Perrysburg welcomes in Marysville, who are coming in off a strong performance a week ago. And I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, and the question is, what do you want to see from the Yellow Jackets as they bring that offense along?
Well, you can't rely on Joe Cini all year. You have to be able to throw the football at some point. Olentangy Orange blew the doors off of Marysville last week. They're coming to Perrysburg. It should be a game that the Jackets should be able to control and win. Again, don't know enough about Marysville to say definitively what they have talent-wise, but I look at this Marysville team, I look at the score from last week. Perrysburg should be okay. But I would also focus on how can I get ready and what am I working on moving forward. I think that passing game has to be brought along. TJ Tackett needs to be able to throw the football. I thought at times last year when Perrysburg needed him, he was fantastic. I go to that playoff game against Whitmer. TJ Tackett's completed some passes to Gavin Fennekin and some different guys on that offense that really made the difference in that playoff win over Whitmer. And they'll need that again this year. But the receivers are just being broken in. So I think he needs to help. And Dirk Connor and that group probably want to see some advancements from the wide receivers and almost put an emphasis early in the game on throwing the football a little bit.
A pair of teams that are looking to kind of find their identity after some rough week 1 losses as Sandusky hits the road to take on Fremont. Ross, is this another kind of one of those, it's up in the air until we know much more about either of these teams?
Very much so. Columbian's good. Again, Sandusky, we mentioned, didn't look great against Clay last week. But this is a game that Fremont Ross can get. They're at home. It's the home opener. Love Don Paul Stadium, one of my favorite venues. Will be going there in a couple of weeks. But my favorite line that I've said, I don't think you've heard it as much, but I used to say a lot. Weird things happen at Don Paul Stadium. It feels like every time Whitmer goes into Don Paul Stadium, something weird happens, all the way down to, I think the last time we were there in 2019, someone turned the lights off on the one side of the field. So again, weird stuff just happens there. Don Paul is one of those kinds of stadiums that just, I think, can be an intimidating place to play. And that's a game against two teams that are not far apart. It's a rivalry in a sense because of how close Fremont and Sandusky are. But that's one that if Ross wants to stay in the conversation, they've got to get a win over Sandusky and put themselves in a better spot heading into league play.
It reminds me of a statement we would make about the Toledo Rockets in the not too recent past, is that weird things happen out in the cornfields of Muncie, Indiana, and their struggles with Ball State a few years ago. Speaking to a good test coming up for Napoleon as they hit the road to take on state runners-up last year in Division 5, Liberty Center, who are also coming in off of a strong win over Tenora a week ago. Like as you spoke with Coach the earlier in the show, what does Napoleon need to do to take all the positives from last week and transfer them into this game against the Tigers and hopefully get their first win over them since, I believe, 2015?
Well, first off, you got to get off to a good start. To be fair to Napoleon, the start that they got off to last week will not be, they won't be able to, if Liberty Center gets out to a 3-score lead, that's game over for Napoleon. They have to be in that ball game from start to finish. The start is so important in a game like that because you want to start building doubt into Liberty Center. You want to be able to have them start thinking a little bit and start getting nervous and start sweating a little bit. I look at that Napoleon team, and I do think that's a really tough and just gritty football team. And that you could see just kind of the way Tyler is, again, just a tough guy, a guy who doesn't give in a whole lot, and his team takes on that mentality. The biggest question I have, too, coming out of that locker room on Friday night is this team going to have a hangover from last week? Are they going to still be riding high? He mentioned that they said you get 24 hours to celebrate it. You watch film on Saturday and you put it to bed and snap out of it because it only gets tougher from here. I wonder how focused that Napoleon team is. The good news, they got a lot of seniors on that group, so they've got experienced guys. And if they can get off to a good start, that could be one heck of a ball game. I'd still probably, if I had to make a pick, I'd probably pick Liberty Center just because the track record of what we saw, as you said, getting all the way to the state finals before losing last year. But Napoleon could definitely surprise some people.
A year ago, Springfield only managed to win 2 games. One of them was a win at home over the Rogers Rams. They now have to head over to Rogers this week. Can they rebound after taking a bit of a shellacking from Maumee a week ago?
They have to, and I think they will. This, as you said, is one of the 2 games they won a year ago. They have another City League game next week. That is not an easy game when you go to Rogers because it's not the easiest stadium. If you're not used to it, it's smaller. It's a little more intimate. They've done some work on it over the recent years, but it's one of those stadiums that you got to be ready to go in and kind of get out early. And that's another game where I'm talking about the start Springfield has to get off to a good start this week. It can't be where they let Rogers hang around. They don't want it to stretch into a fourth quarter where Rogers is still in the ball game. They want to be able to get out, get in, have a good start, and get out. And that's going to be the real key for the Blue Devils. I like Charles Smith. I think he does a nice job, but that's one where they can't afford to get off to a slow start this weekend. And Maumee, to Evan Karchner's credit out there, he had his kids ready to play, and that's a team that's taken a step or started to take a step in year two, the big step in year one, starting to take that step in year two. That was a much closer game a year ago. Maumee left, no doubt, last week. They, meaning Springfield, have to be ready to go on Friday.
Two more teams looking to make a rebound after getting rolled in week one. Fostoria hits the road to take on Bowling Green. Van Buren handled Fostoria, and I think Bowling Green were kind of taken aback by this
Absolutely
new look Otsego that they ran into. Who ends up righting the ship?
Well, I said to you last week, I wondered how Otsego was going to look when Craig Rutherford takes the helm. He's a terrifically accomplished head coach. Was terrific at Eastwood, will be terrific at Otsego. BG has to get back to basics. Focus on getting Jay Shannon, Jackson Schaefer the football, run the football, control the clock, win in Bowling Green fashion. Fostoria has been down over the last couple of years. I look at Fostoria and I wonder what they'll look like. I don't know enough about them anymore to say how good or bad they are this year, but history tells you that they're not great, but BG has to get that one. That's one that, again, if they want to make the playoffs this year, which it's easier than ever to do, but it still doesn't mean it's a slam dunk. They have to get that one. But I look for BG to bounce back. And like I said, I lean on my two backs doing that.
Anthony Wayne hits the road to come up north and take on St. John's after a workmanlike performance a week ago against Darby. I guess there's two questions. It's true, how good is Darby? And I guess we'll find that out as we go through the season. But really, how good will Anthony Wayne be? And also, how good can the Titans be in a year where they clearly are improving?
Well, St. John's, tough loss against Wapakoneta last week. Grant Kinney, as we said, not great throwing the football, much better running the football. Andy Brungard, he'll do what he has to do to win. I mean, he's not a slave to appearances or anything like that. If they have to run, they will. Braden Gardner was very good for Anthony Wayne last week. The big question I have about St. John's is that's the dedication of Fred Beyer Field. And Fred Beyer, for those who don't know, longtime head coach of St. John's. Actually, our day job, our boss is a graduate of St. John's. He had talked about how many guys who had played under Fred Beyer are going back for that field dedication on Friday. And make no mistake, there are going to be some people in that building that would love to pull off an upset over Anthony Wayne in their first game on that field. I think Anthony Wayne's too good. Having seen St. John's in the scrimmage that we saw him in, I don't know offensively where they're going to be at. They like to run their quarterback quite a bit, but Anthony Wayne, I think, is the better team. I look at, again, I feel like a broken record, but the start is so key on Friday. You're on the road. Make sure you get off to a good start for Anthony Wayne. Don't give St. John's a chance to even think that they're in that ball game on Friday.
And we saved what is probably going to be the game of the week in the area for last game. We will be at starting at 6:30 on Q105.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the Whitmer Panthers taking on Central Catholic down at the Gallagher. I'll rob you right now, so you don't have to worry about it. It will be vital for Whitmer to come out and start hot like they did against Dublin Kaufman. What are the other keys into what would be a large upset? Again, Central Catholic has moved up to third in the state Power 25 from USA Today. So it would be a huge win if Whitmer pulls this out.
I always go back to 2017 because that was the last time that Whitmer beat Central. And 2017 to me, where Whitmer did a nice job. Whitmer did two things really well in that game. One, they managed the clock really well. But two, I thought they managed the emotions or the roller coaster. That is a game that has so many twists and turns in it every year. And Central is going to make plays. Central is going to knock you in the mouth. And can you ride that momentum? Can you ride that out and deal with it and not lose your composure? And that is the biggest key against Central. Central, for as great as they are also a team that knows what they do well and they don't do well. And Central doesn't kind of put on airs of we're this or we're that, or we try and be balanced. Central likes to run the football and they like to be physical on defense and blitz the heck out of you. So can you handle that pressure? And in 17, where Whitmer was able to do it, was they were able to handle the pressure. In that game, Central actually scored like on the first or second play of the game. Jace Bowen, I think, took a pass like 80, like a screen pass like 80 yards. And I remember thinking at that time, how Whitmer responds in this moment is going to dictate whether or not they win that game. Same thing on Friday. Central is going to make plays. Central is going to have big plays in their back pocket. It's just the nature. They're too good not to. How do you handle that adversity if you're Whitmer? There is no pressure on the Panthers. That's the one thing I will say. Ken Winter said it last week. We got that win over Dublin Kaufman. We just didn't want to be 0-2 again. We're not going to be to start the year. The pressure's on Central to win. Everybody expects Central to win that football game. Brady Ford has to take that next step. That running game has to be efficient. Ball security is going to be crucial. And how does that offensive line hold up against Central's defense? Other side, same thing. We saw, to be fair, a Dublin Kaufman team that ran the football really well against Whitmer last week. Their quarterback ran for 180 yards. I don't know that anybody on Central is as talented as what we saw in Amari Valerio Hudson last week from Kaufman, but they've got a lot of players that are pretty darn close. And can that defense bend but not break again? Can they keep Central out of the end zone, have them settle for field goals, have them turn the ball over in the red zone? It's a chance that Whitmer has not had in recent memory, where they actually, I think, have maybe their best chance to win that game. But yes, the start is critical as well. But I think the number one thing is, can you ride the ups and downs of that game and stay in the middle, not get too high, not get too low, because that's what Central does to you. They are able to get you down and you quit. And that's what they're so good at, because they're so good. A lot of teams just kind of wave the white flag and go, you know what, we'll get you later. So that, to me, I think mental is so big in this game, and I cannot stress it enough. And anybody who listens to the game on Friday is going to hear me say that 8 million times over too, because whoever can win that mental battle is who's going to win on Friday, in my opinion. But we'll see. I mean, that'll be fun.
A pair of other games I'll be keeping my eye out as we're on the air, starting at 6:30 on Q1055. St. Francis trying to right the ship against Scott, as well as keep an eye on Maumee, trying to go 2-0 for the first time since 2017. Nice. They hit the road to take on Bryan.
Well, that's a Maumee team. Evan Karchner is done wonders at Maumee in recent memory. Well, that'll do it for week number 2 of NLL Weekly. Make sure that you, again, like, subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on Apple. Check us out on Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcast. That'll drop, again, Thursdays. We usually are going to tape Wednesdays around 7 is usually the goal, to be live at 7, so you can watch us live. Watch it back on YouTube. We do appreciate, again, if you'd like and subscribe, leave us a review and all those spots. Quick thank you again to our sponsors, Victory Auto Mall and Car Stereo One. We appreciate their support as well. And then, of course, thank you to Tyler Swary for giving us a few moments of his time tonight. Really good interview. Best of luck to them on Friday against Liberty Center as well. So for another week, we'll be back week number 3. Looking forward to breaking down and letting you know what we saw on Friday and all the other scores and news from the Northern Lakes League on NLL Weekly, the number 1 podcast covering Northwest Ohio's number 1 athletic conference. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.